Hello, today I'd like to take an in-depth look at the gameplay of Darkest Dungeon 2. I've noticed that many people that seem to be fans of the first one criticize the differences in the second, but having played it for several dozen hours now, I've noticed that from a design perspective it's very close to the first one. So why is it perceived to be so different? Let's take a deep dive into the features of the second game and see if we can't answer that question. For those who might not be familiar with the gameplay of Darkest Dungeon 2, the game is centered around confessions. There's 5 total, and each confession involves going through multiple locations that are effectively the dungeons from the first game. Almost nothing carries over between confession runs. You choose new characters, and everything you pick up during the confession is held in the inventory of your carriage. At the end, the only things you keep are the candles you've earned, and the skills you unlocked at Shrines of Reflection. All the trinkets, currency, and characters don't carry over between runs. At the start of the next run, you can spend your candles at the Altar of Hope, which is effectively your town, to buy permanent upgrades to your character classes and your carriage. So when you pick your new characters for the new run, they'll benefit from these upgrades. The idea is that you'll eventually have enough upgrades to complete all 5 confessions and finish the game. The key difference between the first and second games is that you no longer recruit and manage individual characters. You manage classes instead. Spending candles on each character class can unlock parts and unique trinkets that allow you to specialize characters of that class in a particular direction. So you can make your plague doctors better at healing, or you can make them better at poisoning by assigning a path when you recruit them. Same with unlockable trinkets, they favor different specializations. In the first game, you'd have to get upgrades for each individual character, but in the second game, these are now options for every future character of that class once you unlock them. My interpretation of the game's focus on classes is that it was meant to reduce the grind. In the first game, you'll end up having an A team. These are the characters you've invested resources in upgrading their skills, getting good gear, and tweaking their quirks. You knew how they fit together and how to get the best performance out of them. Getting to that point involved grinding dungeons to pick up the resources to upgrade your town, unlock upgrades, and upgrade each character individually. It was great seeing a well put together team smashing their way through dungeons, but eventually you always ran into a boss that was just too tough and your party got wiped. So you had to put together another A team, get them trained up and outfitted, try that tough boss again and maybe get party wiped again. Try again and again until you get past the obstacle and move on to the next one. Focusing on upgrading classes tries to shortcut the grind of recreating your A team because your upgrades are permanent. You simply choose a new party with the same classes, and in theory they should be just as good as your last party. So you can see what the aim was, and it did reduce the grind involved in acquiring the resources to get back to the same spot you were at before your A team got wiped. But the problem was that if the aim was to remove the grind, it didn't go far enough. It just changed where and how you have to grind. The reason I say that is that you still have to repeatedly grind to properly upgrade your character classes. Firstly, you need to acquire candles to get permanent upgrades at the Altar of Hope. You can only get them by running confessions, and because successful confessions give you the most candles, the best approach is to run the confessions you've beaten over and over again until you have enough candles. This is basically the same in both games. You need to grind for currency to get upgrades. But the big exception to this is unlocking skills for character classes. These involve finding shrines during confessions to get more backstory for that character class. There's no other way, so in this particular aspect, the game is forcing you to repeatedly grind confessions. Each character class has 5 parts to their backstory, so even if you know exactly what classes you want, you're looking at a minimum of 20 shrines you have to find. More if you consider that when you start playing, you can't see where the shrines are, and that you don't know which classes are the best. So in reality we're looking at running say 40 confessions minimum to get a party close to being fully upgraded. Essentially, the grind hasn't gone away. It's been reduced. Your currency is only spent on actual upgrades. At the same time, the character skill system is explicitly designed to force you to play confessions over and over again. But there also seems to be a perception problem with Darkest Dungeon 2. The total amount of grinding is less, yet people see it as worse than the first one. The obvious question is why. In the first game you played dungeons over and over, but you had the choice of which dungeon to choose to play. It's really a cosmetic choice. but the player still gets a choice even if it's mostly an illusion of choice. The second game unfortunately makes it obvious that you're grinding. Every confession starts at the valley. It's the same whether you're doing it for the first or the 100th time. Within a confession you get to choose between locations to travel through, and the layouts of locations are randomized. So there's actually a lot of variation within confessions. The developers have taken care to make sure the visuals at each location are unique, so it would be unfair to expect them to have dozens of unique locations. But it does mean that it's obvious to the player that they're repeatedly playing the same locations over and over again. This is most noticeable in the early parts of the game, when your parties aren't strong enough to get far into confessions, and unfortunately early impressions tend to make a strong impact. Unfortunately, this perception gap is made worse because of the lack of permanency. Every time you start a confession, you choose a new set of characters. The mastery points you spent to upgrade skills, the trinkets you acquired, the quirks you managed, and any relationships between characters. Anything that you might have spent time on during confessions are all gone once the confession ends. The game gives you a feeling of starting every confession from scratch. It's not actually true, of course. Your new characters do start with whatever upgrades you got at the Altar of Hope, and whatever story skills you unlocked. But the lack of persistence across confessions does take away a lot of that sense of progress. One of the attractions in games like XCOM and the first Darkest Dungeon is seeing your characters progress and grow as you take them through combat. You don't get the depth of party interaction and character development that fully fledged party RPGs like Dragon's Age or Mass Effect give you, but players often do get attached to characters that perform well. Darkest Dungeon 2 does still have a lot of the same systems that the first game did. For example, the quirks system is still there. You have to get to a field hospital, but you can still remove bad ones and fix good ones. Which is great within that confession, but ultimately it's wasted effort because it doesn't last once the confession ends. The same applies to the relationship system. Your characters start neutral but have a chance to improve or worsen their relationship with each other depending on things like quirks. You can help them like each other more by buying them cards to play or whiskey to share. If they get a relationship, two characters will have a random skill designated. Using that skill will give the other character a benefit. It could be a stress reduction, a free buff, or even healing. This is a very good bonus, especially if a skill you use often gets designated, because on the other hand, skills can only be upgraded once. Relatively speaking, relationship bonuses are pretty strong. But once again, these relationships don't matter after a confession is finished. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about, I've had runs where pretty much every character had a positive relationship with at least a couple of others, and the skill buffs from those relationships made a big difference in being able to finish that confession. I would have loved to keep that team together, but of course it wasn't possible, and it was a real shame to see those characters just get destroyed. The game is inconsistent about what it wants to do with characters. On the one hand, it wants you to focus on classes, rather than individual characters. But at the same time, it still holds on to systems that focus on those individual characters. You see similar small inconsistencies in other places too. For example, you can control the carriage while driving, but you can't avoid the major obstacles. The only thing you can do is try and get bonus items by hitting small obstacles. You're given control, but your control isn't allowed to make a difference. Another example is how you can purchase items during trips, like food to buff your characters, but you can't consume it until you get to an inn. The same goes with stagecoach items. They can only be equipped at inns, though you could reasonably argue that this makes more sense because you can't just stop to work on your coach while traveling. Then going back to the relationship system, a strange feature is that they get reset at every inn. You keep the relationship scores, but whatever relations they gained, either good or bad, get reset, and you can pick up fresh ones as you set off from the inn. There's justification for why you start confessions with new characters, but why do they forget about each other during the same trip? That part doesn't make any sense. It seems that the designers wanted to avoid the situation where your party hate each other so much that the run becomes unviable, but it also undermines the relationship system as a whole. Especially because this happens after you upgrade skills. You might upgrade a skill affected by a good relationship, but then the relationship gets reset, and another random skill might get the bonus. Or even worse, your newly upgraded skill gets a penalty, so relationships resetting also affects the skill upgrade system. Like I said, these things are not the end of the world, but they do serve to highlight how the game wants to do one thing, but then it does something else. Ultimately, this inconsistency and lack of permanency in the game system discourages players from becoming invested in the game.
To see unwitnessed by his own eyes.
So how could these things have been addressed? One obvious approach would have been to do the same as the first game, but a sequel can't just repeat what's already been done, otherwise you just play the earlier game. So doing exactly the same thing is pretty much a no-go for any sequel. It might not quite work out, but you can't blame the developers for trying to change things. But in making those changes, arguably the game didn't take things far enough. If your individual characters are going to be destroyed after every confession, then features like quirks and relationships don't have much of a place. Removing them would have been one option, but at the same time, what would you replace them with? There's no obvious answer that wouldn't alienate strong fans of the first game even more. The best of both worlds would have been to keep your team between confessions. On the surface it seems to be a fairly simple change. Just make it so you don't choose new characters at the start of each confession. You get your old team back. There might be some questions of balance though, because the game's encounters would have been designed with a new party in mind. It might make encounters easier than intended, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue because character classes get upgraded as you play multiple runs anyway. It would reduce grind if anything. This simple change will go a long way towards helping players maintain a sense of continuity and interest in their characters. Going to field hospitals to manage quirks and building up relationships will be meaningful, because you actually keep those characters through the entire journey, at least until your party gets wiped. But at the same time, you get to take advantage of the systems designed to reduce grind. So when you do get wiped, there's less time wasted training up rookies before you try hard dungeons again. I'm not sure how feasible such a change would be now that the game is fully released, but it would bring back some of the factors that helped make the first game such a success. It's an unfortunate fact that sequels are hard. They've always been, but before the age of DLCs, developers could put their new ideas into a sequel. Now these ideas go into a DLC instead, which makes sequels even more challenging to get right. Darkest Dungeon 2 is in some ways a victim of the sequel problem, and the success of the first game means that any sequel was always going to be under a microscope. You can see where the devs have tried to add meaningful change to the game. Unfortunately, the reception hasn't been as good as you might hope, and it's true that there's some areas that suffer from not being changed enough. But you can see that it was a genuine attempt, and at heart, the game is still a Darkest Dungeon experience. A few changes, especially the one I mentioned about keeping your parties across confessions, would help to address some of the reasons why fans of the first game might not be as keen on the sequel. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear what your own experience has been with Darkest Dungeon 2, and what your thoughts are on the game. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments. Feel free to leave a like, subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when new videos come out. See you soon.